All right, we're live again. This is George Evjen, and we're doing our LinkedIn Live. This is kind of a supplement to my podcast of Out from the Cube, and I'm just kind of reaching out to people randomly on LinkedIn and having these. That has been great with this quarantine in the extent of I'm just having these great conversations with people that I do not know. And so we have Anna Oakes with us today, and Anna and I do not know each other. We haven't spoke except for maybe 5 minutes before we clicked record, and so we had a hard time kind of arranging this and getting some schedules going. But Anna, welcome
Thank you.
to my LinkedIn Live that we're doing, and I will eventually take this and take the audio and put it to my podcast as well. But thank you for making time for us today.
Of course, it's my pleasure. I appreciate the break during this quarantine. So
yes,
yeah,
it is. It has been
first LinkedIn Live with you.
Yes, it is. You haven't done a LinkedIn Live, so
No.
Yeah, these are. It's very hard for me still to this day. I've been doing podcasting and LinkedIn Live and some of this, content creation type stuff for 2 years now. And even 2 years in, I'm still very hesitant to click record and then to publish it and put it out there and all that goes along with that. So
I started my podcast late last fall, and I think it took me like 3 weeks to record my first introduction to myself, because I kept like, no,
right.
But then I did it and just did it straight up. No stops, no editing. Was just like, here, this is what's happening.
Well, what's the name of your podcast?
Build high-performing teams.
Building high-performing teams.
Yes.
Perfect.
We really just focus on making sure we're sharing tips and thought leaders and experts in the world of work. So I consider myself an expert in leadership and very curious about the future of work. I'm not a fortune teller, so I don't really know everything that's going to happen, but I like to make sure we're exposing both at leadership level, but also at the employee base, making sure that we're supporting both of those levels within corporations.
Just even with what you said, I had 5 questions rattle through my head. But let's start. I was really interested in what we were talking about before we clicked record. And I'm guessing I didn't ask you this. You're okay with some of the questions about your family and the schooling and all that sort of stuff?
Sure. Yeah. Happy to share.
So, but you really had, and you don't have to necessarily tell the whole story, but you had this great comment of, that now that I have 2 children the same age. I have a 9 and a 9. Yeah, he'll be 10 in a week, and an 11-year-old. And we've had to flip, now we have homeschooling and, there's a different organization to this and structure to this and requirements that are a part of all this. And you had a great comment offline where you said, somebody said, and I'm not going to get it right, so correct me, but I'm not built for this. This isn't my strength. This isn't my wheelhouse. And talk about that, because it was a younger student that said that. Was it your son that said that, or daughter?
Yeah, no, someone else's. But
okay.
There were 2 things that sort of flowed together for me this week, George. Was it yesterday? Like, the days are blending together, but it was either yesterday or the day before. I was on with one of my client companies, Fortune 500, sort of toward the top of the list, an executive that works for them. And we were just chatting, and I said, what surprised you most about the last couple of weeks? And he's got a really big job, so I was expecting maybe it was more on the financial side. And he said, honestly, it's the people, how some people have reacted. Some people who I thought would be good are not so good, and some people who I thought were going to really struggle are okay, for lack of a better word. And I just encouraged him, and I think even posted on Instagram, like, guys, let's not forget that we don't understand how people are going to react to situations, because we bring so much of our history and our experiences and our own personal traumas to things like this. And situations like this can be super triggering for so many. It's hard to predict. And 2, just because somebody says they're okay or seems okay doesn't mean that they are. Doesn't mean that they don't need checking. Doesn't mean that they don't need the care and feeding that a normal employee, does. I use that sort of gardening term. So that was the first thing that struck me. And then my son, so I have 9-year-old twins, and it's a little bit of a science experiment in our house. So they're, first of all, boy, girl. So we have some of the gender differences. And then they are both very friendly and pretty outgoing for, trying not to overly label them. But my daughter really thrives in challenging situations, like waking up in the morning and seeing a long list of to-dos in her inbox. And she's like, I'm going to get these done. And she will work for an hour, and then they're all done for the day. And my son wakes up like 2 hours later, because he's the night owl, And he looks at the list and he's like, oh, I mean, it's just, I immediately see how drained he is because a couple things about him. You know, we think certainly he has some sensory issues, right? Like, and maybe even some ability to focus issues. So we went through that whole IEP process during school this year. I don't know if you
Mhm.
guys have ever had to do that, but it's sort of it's a process you go through to get your child additional support.
Hmm.
And as much as my husband and I were like, look, we don't want to label this ADHD or attention, whatever, we wanted to give him that additional support that he needed. So we went through that and realized just how overly stimulated he was by all the things going around in the room, the technology, the open work environment, everything, right? So that's his normal day. And now then you take it to this long list of written emails, which is not his sweet spot. And he
Mhm.
just feels frustrated constantly.
Mm.
So I asked if I could jump on the phone, and this is what I was sharing with you. I asked the school, could I jump on the phone with the school counselor? And we got to know her really well last year just through helping us transition into a new school. We used to be in a Waldorf school. So she's been very helpful. We were talking, and she said, listen, she has a family member who has ADHD and is a student. And he said to her, you know, I feel like this environment is bringing out all my weaknesses and none of my strengths. And
Mm.
it just struck me like, yes, that's exactly what Asher, my 9-year-old, is feeling. And
Mm.
it just was such an awakening and empowering moment to say, like, yeah, this is it's not setting him up. The structure is just not setting him up right now, at least, for
Mhm.
success or him to feel like he is operating in his zone of genius. And for a coach who helps high performers for a living and uses Clifton Strengths as one of my tools, like I want everybody to, I say at least 60% of the time, you can be in your sweet spot. It's going to probably fuel you for the other 40. And he hasn't
Mm.
been in his sweet spot for weeks. Weeks.
Mm.
And either are some of our employees. They are
Yeah.
so off kilter. This is so not their norm. And companies, as much as they've been showing grace to allow people to work from home and sort of getting creative on how we do that, they're not supporting as strategically or adequately as they could if we had more time to think this through,
Yeah,
right?
so that would be my question to you. So, like, when you heard that and kind of you had this light bulb in terms of thinking about your son, and yeah, that's my son. He's like not in his wheelhouse. He's not in his strength right now. He's, you know, are you trying to create an environment for him now
Yeah,
where he can like get more locked in and more focused and all that? Right.
yeah,
I would assume like as parents, we're going to do that. So I guess then the question would be, what should we be doing? Should we be spending that time as leaders? I consider myself a leader. It's one of those things, right? I'm going to be a leader even if I don't have the title. I'm going to try to
mhm.
continue to do these things. But I happen to have a team that I do run. Is that something I should be thinking about? Is that something I need to sit back and kind of evaluate the landscape and say, hey, is everybody, or is it as simple as asking questions of people? How should I approach that as a leader and somebody running some teams?
Yeah, well, it's such an interesting conversation that we're having because I often, when I'm coaching executives or leaders, I will say, look, don't overcomplicate leadership. But at the same time, it is super hard in the sense like
Mm.
parenting, I think, is the hardest job you can have ever. Leadership being, I think, just under that because we're dealing with humans who are not under our control, but do deserve our support and encouragement and the resources that we can give them. So it's sort of this catch 22 of constantly watching what lane they're on and then gently nudging so they don't go too far off track, knowing that it's
Mm-hmm.
their lane, but we don't want them falling off the cliff. So I think leadership's the same way. Like we're working with humans, first of all, grown humans whose frontal lobe is fully formed. They're now able theoretically to fully reason as an adult. And so they have this opportunity to be in this crazy work environment with other humans, but the complicated part is that everybody works differently, everybody thinks differently. And so they're having these challenges in a normal environment. And in a normal environment, to answer your question, George, I would say to leaders, yes, you do need to understand the unique differences between everybody on your team. Because if you don't, you're pushing out information, you're connecting in one way that might grab a percentage of your employees, but you're forgetting about the other half, three quarters, whatever percentage that doesn't like to be led that way, that doesn't like to be communicated with that way, that doesn't respond positively to feedback in that way, right? There's all these like idiosyncrasies about humans that show up in the workplace that now we put everybody in a time of stress where we're either confined alone, right? Some people are
Yeah.
confined alone. Other people are caring for loved ones, whether that is, I have a friend who's caring for her ailing mother, right? Not from COVID. She's been sick for quite a while, but they have other healthcare workers in and out of the house. So that's not only a hat she wears, but an additional stress while she's working a job. Then, you and I have talked about having to homeschool, which is not at all what we're doing. We're sort of like patchworking everything. Yeah. So we're learning like that, which just means we're put in an additional time of stress, which means when we are put in a zone like my son Asher has been, or a lot of our employees have been, where we're not operating in our area of strength and we're forced to constantly, like all day, be hitting our head up against the wall in the areas or the structures that we're weakest in, it's going to cause frustration, a lot of frustration.
Yeah, and I guess I apologize to those listening. I was really interested in our conversation before we clicked record, but I should have asked. Actually, my first question probably should have been having you say what you do. Like, what do you do for a living? Like, what? Yeah, I know I've read your bio. I know you've done some TED Talks and all that. But what do you do for a living?
Yeah, so I own a company called Build High-Performing Teams, and we do consulting and coaching to help companies and organizations and leaders get out of their way and get back to work. So removing a lot of those barriers between here's where I want to go as a company, but here's how I need to leverage my talent in order to get there.
So, and how long have you been running that company?
Gosh, I was in corporate America for 20 years, and then I went out on my own 4 years ago. My parent company that oversees all of the work that we do is We Restore Humanity, because that's our mission of restoring humanity into the world of work. Like everything we do around Build High-Performing Teams and a couple of the other brands that we're working on building has to align to that mission, which is, are we offering this thing, this service, this product in order to help restore or sustain humanity in the workplace? Because after 20 years of being in the workplace and seeing a lot, like it's a need, right? Because again, we're a complicated group of humans thrown into an environment where we spend most of our time. And unfortunately, it's really an antiquated system that's just not set up to highlight, like we said, highlight our strengths on a normal day, but especially right now.
So a very general, broad question here then. So how do we, when you go in, if we were to bring you in and you were to work with our teams, how do we build high performing teams? What is a high performing team? And I guess what led you to that? Were you 20 years in the workforce and sitting around saying, man, we can do better. I can help these teams. I can provide value to these organizations, and I'm just going to go out on my own and do this. What was your background, I guess, in that? I know that's like 3 or 4 questions right there, but I'm interested on how you build high performing teams, what that looks like, and how you got into it.
Yeah. So my corporate career, 20 years, I started out and luckily, I took a maturing break from college for a year after not going to class and getting to know all of the bars around college. So I took a maturing year, and during that maturing year, I was lucky enough to land at first a temporary gig with State Farm Insurance, and I was their receptionist. And then after that year, they hired me permanently on board and said, like, hey, I know you want to go back to school. We have a call center that's 24 hours a day, 365 in Bloomington, Illinois. And at the time I was in the Quad Cities, which is like on the border of Illinois and Iowa. That's where I grew up. And I was like, oh, okay. So I started looking at Illinois State, which was the university there. And I thought, yeah, okay, well, my parents are no longer helping me with college because I blew it that first time. So I got to cover this. So I'm going to have to work full time. So I worked full time. I moved there and worked my way through that State Farm environment. After 5 years with them and understanding, I think that was an amazing place to cut my teeth in a call center, understanding what people needed, how to cater to different needs, both the people who were calling into State Farm and the call reps that were taking these calls. I was able to leverage that knowledge of leadership, and I landed a role for a director of customer care for a print marketing company that did a lot of work with State Farm there in Bloomington, Illinois. So after 5 years with State Farm, I went to do that for a couple of years. Loved it. Loved the leadership aspect of understanding how to build different teams, how to work within these dynamics. Really cut my teeth there. That was my first official termination, and it wasn't fun because it wasn't performance-based, it was health-based. And the gentleman who I was working with just stopped turning in medical notes, and we just couldn't keep him on. So it was really hard. But I learned my lesson. HR said, don't cry so much.
Oh,
don't cry so much in a termination.
yeah.
This guy's worked for me for 2 years and he's really, really sick. And now we're saying like, bye, you can't have our health insurance or your pay anymore. So it was really hard too. They said, don't cry so much and don't say, I wish I didn't have to do this. And I don't know how solid that advice is because even though I worked in HR now for a lot of years, I'm not an HR expert when it comes to things like that, right? I tend to be more like led by the heart leader.
Mm-hmm.
So worked my way through that, ended up relocating here to Milwaukee, worked for a company here, and started out in their supply chain area and was going to move into supply chain leadership and thought I would sort of stick to that customer care supply chain, sort of route because I really enjoyed thinking through complex situations like you have in supply chain, but I still wanted to be at that leadership level. But I quickly saw that the company that I was with at the time had big growth plans, but really didn't have a great talent acquisition strategy. So I started asking questions and got really curious. Long story short, they ended up saying like, hey, if you have so much to say about this and so many good ideas, let's put you in a role that does that. And so I think my title at the time, George, was Talent Acquisition Ambassador. Totally made it up. I was like, yeah, ambassador sounds really great. And then we moved my desk into HR, and I was like, oh, I'm in HR. I had no idea like what had to do, what people in HR did or how my role fit in. And I didn't receive the warmest welcome because there wasn't a big change management that happened. And hey, we're starting this new role. This gal's going to get it and none of you are. And it was a role where I got to play a lot, right? My role was to build the employer brand for that company. And so I did a lot of work with the local universities, not in direct recruiting because we had recruiters that did that, but in building relationship with the senior leadership, the professors. I also did that with all the nonprofits in town. I just really wanted to make sure this company that I loved so much had that great employer brand so they could bring in the talent when they needed to so that they could achieve those goals. Yeah, and so I did that for a few years, got recruited to do that for Manpower Global here in Milwaukee. I'm lucky to have their headquarters here. Loved that, and my role quickly expanded from the way we attract talent to the way we retain and engage talent. And so I started finding myself at the table with the executive team, giving not just counsel on that attraction, but all around. And so they gave me a new HR title that I had never heard of, which was OD specialist or organizational development specialist or consultant. And really OD, a lot of people define it differently, but if you hear people who have OD on their title or OD's background, it's a beautiful thing. And for me, it focuses on change. It talks about how organizations change, how they can leverage change, and how they can leverage their talent through change. And so it was a great area. And change is not all part of it. Obviously, we're dealing with the whole talent cycle of attract, develop, retain, and engage. But just a really fun time. And so after that role and the expansion of that, I started getting recruited by a financial services firm here in Milwaukee. And they worked on me for 2 years before I agreed to come over. And I led their business partner team in HR and really enjoyed that aspect, quickly took on their other aspects of HR, including their talent development. And so again, just using what I really perceived, George's like common sense came very naturally to me, I guess I should say, that I was asking these curious questions, understanding how we could get things from here to there. And at the time I didn't have this language, but later I would learn I just always had this two strengths of futuristic thinking and strategic thinking. So I was able to clearly see where we could go. And then the strategic thinking helped me build a plan to get there. So it's been a really fun journey. I loved being in corporate, but really wanted to be out and work with more companies and make a broader impact in terms of restoring humanity. If that really is my mission, and I believe that it is, then I want to be able to broaden that impact than just one company at a time.
Yeah. No. So, that's great. So then you started this company, and how long did you say you've been running with this company now?
Yeah, 4 years. I took a 6 month sabbatical when I left, and I highly recommend if people are transitioning roles or even going from one company to another, or like I did, jumping from an organization to solopreneur, entrepreneur, whatever you want to call that, that you take that. And I did. I took 6 months to just chill. And people are like, oh, you worked on your business plan. And I was like, no, I just detoxed. I detoxed from 20 years of go, 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 20 years of my cortisol firing at such high rates that I needed to just like ground down a little bit. And I'm so glad that I did, because it really made me more successful and made me, I guess I should say a different way, it made me feel more equipped to serve than if I had immediately gone into, hey, let's start this.
Right.
And the second benefit was that I had a waiting list of clients, because people had heard I
No.
was out on their own and I had a good network, and they were like, hey, when you're ready, we're ready.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
The garbage man is coming by. I'm sitting outside, so you're going to hear the garbage truck roll by, although he stopped. So now the name of the company is Building High Performing Teams. So the first one question, instead of throwing 5 or 6 at you at the same time, what does that mean to you? What is a high performing team?
Well, I think it's that balance, right? You know, I have a high performing team framework that I work with, which is very simple. When you asked me earlier, I think one of your earlier questions, when you threw that multi-parter at me, was, you know, what is that build high performing team and how do you get there? I mean, I think for me, it's I try to make it as simple as I can, and it's about connect, align, and execute. And connecting means that you've got to connect both with the leader, the why, and with your team members. And that doesn't mean you have to be best friends, but that does mean that you need to focus on that connection, especially the leader. It's not only up to the leader, but the leader has to set the tone. Or if the tone has already been set by the team and it needs to change for some reason, they've got to be that drum major. I was a drumline in my life. So they got to be that drum major that says like, okay, we're all playing different beats. This is the beat we're going to play.
Yeah.
Not in an authoritative manner, but in a like, okay, I'm going to set the example. This is how we're going to do work from now on.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's great to hear, you know, for those that have been listening to my podcast or these LinkedIn Lives, it is a reoccurring theme when we talk about leadership and team dynamics and team enhancement and all this sort of stuff and the buzzwords that we talk about. Man, everybody rolls in with connection. They really do. And like everybody right now, at least in the company I work with, you know, we're seeing these virtual happy hours, and we're seeing Zoom meetings, and we're seeing anything we can do to make sure that we're connected with our teams and with what is going on right now with the COVID and being quarantined. So, you know, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about the connection. And I think people are paying, I don't know if it's more or different attention to it right now because of where we are.
Yeah.
And I love to see that. And I'm actually tracking what organizations are doing. And I'm trying to put that out and promote that. Like, oh, over here, you know, Complex, which I had their head of HR on. They're a company out of New York. They're really a modern company, and they deal a lot with like media and advertising. And so they have a young sort of, let's just say young and hip culture, for lack of a better phrase, makes me sound old, but they do. And so their work remote and how they're keeping their employees engaged looks like sneaker battles, right? Where the sneakerheads are coming on and they're saying, who's got the better shoe, this person or this person. That's how they're keeping not only their employees engaged, but they're aligning to their brain. So it works both ways. And then you have other companies that would be ridiculous. That's not what we do normal time. So why would we do that now? Who are doing, like another client company of mine is having virtual battleship competitions. So either you have a battleship that you can play with, or they give out paper where you know, do it. And it's just things like that you can engage. I love to see the activity, but I want to point out that activity does not create connection. So it might be fun, and those things are great. And I do believe that you need to put effort into them. But true connection, it's like loneliness, right? So definition of loneliness is not like I'm got no one around me. I can be surrounded by people and still be lonely, because I go by the definition of loneliness means you lack meaningful connection. And so loneliness at work is during normal times is more prevalent than we think it is, George.
Hmm.
And now, especially during times like this, loneliness could be even worse, or even, even more prevalent for somebody, or for a team. So just because we're having those fun happy hours doesn't mean somebody feels deep, meaningful connection. That's where the
Mm.
leader again sets the tone that says, like, hey guys, I want you to build these connections in micro ways, and they show how to do that, right? One
Mm.
of the best leaders I ever had, Carrie Ulrich, she was my leader at Manpower. I think definitely the best leader I ever had. And she would do really meaningful one-on-ones with us every week. But once a month this is how I learned my pattern, and I suggest this for everybody. Meet weekly, but once a month. It's not about any projects you're working on. It's just about you and your engagement in the organization. But I have to tell you that when she initiated these, I, for months, was like, we don't have to do that one. Like, let's just skip that one. I was like, ah, la, 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 la. Like, we're good. I totally trust you. And she was like, no, we're doing that one.
Mm.
And after months of trying, she got so frustrated. She's like, all right, look, you love Bloody Marys. I'm taking you out for a Bloody Mary. That's going to be our one-on-one. We're going to go out for a Bloody Mary. We're just going to talk. So she found out, like, for me, this person, I was a true high performer. I had great high potential within her organization. Those are two categories HR usually looks at: high performer, high potential. So she definitely wanted to invest in me, but I wasn't easy to manage. I didn't want to be led, but that doesn't mean that I didn't need to be.
Mm.
She really initiated that and kept at it until she figured out what was going to take to get me to, like, have that conversation with her. And it wasn't that I didn't trust her. It wasn't that I didn't like her. I just
Yeah.
didn't want to talk about that. I was like, no, I'm good. Like, let's just keep going. I just want to go, 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 go. Again, that was my, like, mentality for 20 years.
Right.
She's like, no, it's really important for us to sit down and slow down. So again, that's an example of how she set the rhythm that said, no, this is how this is going to go.
How hard was that for you to have those conversations? So some people, just much like you didn't want to have those conversations. You just wanted to go and you wanted to figure out what the next task or project is that you need to execute on. And you don't want to worry about having margaritas talking about your home life or whatever it might be, right? Or what really inspires and motivates you to get to maybe the next level. And I come across that, without question, but for the receiver of that, to sit down and you're having that and she's trying to get you to open up and do, like, what did that do for you? I understand what it does for, her and the connection and her, you trying to, show you that she cares about you more as a person than an employee and things like that. But what did that do for you?
Oh, I mean, to do something that I didn't think was necessary.
Right.
And it's hard to say it was required, but it was necessary. And what it did is it did deepen my connection with her, and it did give her a unique opportunity to coach me in a different way than she could when we're in the midst of talking about project updates and I'm stuck with this executive, I can't move this project forward. It was away from all of that, and it was just about me. And so sometimes, George, we would end up talking about, at the time I was trying to get pregnant. I was going through in vitro fertilization because I think by that time I'd had 4 surgeries and, abdominal surgeries, and needed a lot of help. And so we spent some time talking about that, but we would always draw that back to, how is that affecting your work? Right. So she built her understanding of me. I built a deeper connection with her. She was able to coach me. I was able to receive that coaching in a really unique way. And in a really subtle, like, not like, I'm going to coach you. Right. So my tip for leaders, when they say, oh yeah, I try to have recurring one-on-ones, but my employees just sort of like, I don't really have anything else to talk about. Like, oh, you want to talk about my engagement? I don't really want to talk about that. Well, yeah, because you don't normally talk about that. So if you have to start the routine, you have to start the rhythm, which means don't make an exception, right? When I led large teams, I would meet with my direct reports once a week. I would meet my skip levels either monthly or quarterly. So people who reported into people who reported to me. I had that rhythm, and it was not something that we could cancel. We were going to stay with it, and they understood that I was going to have those types of conversations with them at least once a month. And then what that did for me and the employee, George, is that once we did that once a month, we were able to more seamlessly weave that, like, more intimate connection into all of the times that we met. So it was less transactional, and it was a deeper connection between them and I. And it wasn't easy. It's always the high performers and the high potentials who are hardest to, like, nope, we're going to talk about this, because they're the ones, even right now, we're like, no, we're good. No, we're
Right.
good. We're just going to keep working. And it's like, no, let's slow down and let's talk about how your work has changed. Let's talk about what your normal zone of genius is and how you're not really able to operate in that way right now.
Yeah.
Right? Or how has that changed, right? Let's ask those questions. And if we don't ask the questions consistently, the employees don't feel like we care.
Yeah. One
So
of the
every
things that,
one-on-one that I had, George, this is a question I always tell people to incorporate in their one-on-ones is, what could I be doing better or differently for you right now?
mm,
And if I ask that every week, which I do even now, I have a team of 4, I ask them that every week, what could I be doing better or differently for you? First couple of times, they're like, no, we're good.
nothing, I'm good.
Either they haven't thought about it, or because they've never been asked, or they're like, I'm not going to tell her what to do. She's the leader. It's like, well, I'm going to keep asking. And eventually you start getting this feedback, and they start naturally weaving it into the conversation before I even ask. But even then, I still ask it at the end. It's like, one more thing, anything else I could be doing better or differently for you. And then they're able to identify, yeah, when my team might say, when you Vox me, which is a walkie-talkie app we used, when you Voxed me, I thought you were upset, right, about that. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, no, glad we talked about that. Thank you for saying that. How could I word that differently so that you didn't feel like I was upset? Because I still needed to address the topic we were talking about. But how could I word that next time so that you understand I was just trying to be clear, but I wasn't mad? So then you
Yeah.
create these opportunities through the rhythm. You set the tone as the leader. That rhythm's really important.
Yeah. Well, you're saying a lot of things I really believe in. I used to coach small college basketball for a long time, and I always felt that and I've used the same phrase you're using, there is a rhythm to a team. There's a heartbeat to a team and an organization. And I do believe it's up to the leader to kind of set that tempo and that beat. And, and to kind of get, I very much used to say it was, it was a dance. It was we were in a band. It was like all of us working together, doing different things. One thing that I do believe in, and that I hear you saying, and I'm interested in your perspective on it, is, for people listening, to this on my podcast or on LinkedIn Live, this is what I'm taking away from you. I'm not saying this is all you're saying. This is just what I am taking away, is that you're trying to create this great environment for honest, authentic feedback, where I can say something, you can receive it. I can say something to you and you can receive it. My belief to a certain extent is, in order to have that authentic and real feedback with someone, you need to have a deeply rooted connection to that person, right? So my experience and my example that I give is, when I became a head coach at a small university, if I had just rolled in and started giving this hard feedback about how everybody needs to improve without really sitting down and knowing who they are and them understanding who I am and what expectations are and vision and, our outcomes and how I care about them, all this sort of stuff. If I had just gone in and started throwing things around, I'd lose them. Like, no question, I would lose them. And there'd be a lot of resentment there. So that's what I'm picking up from you, is to have that connection, to make that feedback authentic. So my question is, and I'm interested in your perspective, when you get hired, and this is what I'm taking away from everything you've been saying. When you go in and start evaluating and observing these companies and these businesses, and let's say you do, and your eyes may go towards, and your thoughts may go towards the leader, to see how he or she is leading and the tempo and creating the rhythm and the culture.
Yeah.
When you provide that feedback, is that a hard conversation, knowing that you may not have that connection? Like, how is it hard to build that connection with these executives? Because my perspective would be this: go fix my team. My team is not performing. They're not as good as they need to be. And I need you to spend a lot of time fixing my team, because I think I'm good. I got this down. They're not performing. I feel like you probably get that when you're probably sitting around going, okay, I immediately know where the problem is. And you're going to give me some feedback that I could be the issue, or that I've got things I need to work on, but we don't really have a connection, and that could irritate me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. So how do I build a connection as a coach? I think it goes the same way, George, which is like, look, I declare from the time that we start working together, even before we, sign the contract, or however you want to say that, part of my job is to point out how we all, and I always use the we, because when I'm working with a client, I'm literally, in my mind and my heart, is in your team. Like, I truly want to help you. And so our role is to figure out what we could be doing better or differently. And that means you as the leader certainly have a part in that. You are an energetic being who has a lot of pull within the organization. So to say that you can't be doing things better or differently is naive. You have to say, like, of course you could be doing things better or differently. None of us have arrived, right? And if you really think you are, then I'm not the coach for you, because I can't fix your team. There's no fixing your team. There's making your team better, more equipped, more connected, more aligned, and higher execution. But there's no fixing. They don't need to be fixed. They need to be nurtured. And they can nurture each other and they can nurture themselves, but they have to have you set the rhythm and give them permission to do that. Because if you don't, even if they've created their own little subculture of nurturing each other, which I've seen, like absent leaders, the team, it's like when a parent's not home, the siblings are going to like take care of each other and like create some spaghetti dinners or, you know, pick up a game. Well, the same thing happens. They've created this subculture, and then maybe that leader wants me to come in and fix their team. No, we just have to get this subculture and that leader closer, move closer. You know, I'm not necessarily saying we're going to get like this. That takes lots of time. And if the leader's heart's not into it and they're not willing to put in the time and effort, then they won't get those results. It doesn't matter what I come in and say or do, how I reorganize the team into a new structure, put a leader underneath you, whatever we want to do around the structure or the systems or even the tools we use. If that leader isn't ready to say, I could be doing better or differently today, I could be doing better or differently tomorrow, then there won't work. And not in a shaming way, George, but in a I'm a human way. I'm a human. As a leader, I'm a human, and I could always be doing better or differently for the people on my team.
So I like that you use the word coach a lot, because that's how I kind of view what I'm doing, right? I'm just trying to, whatever the company wants to phrase me and title me, that's fine. But I'm essentially look at myself. I'm just trying to coach everybody up on, their improvement, who they are, what they can contribute, the results that we get, the processes that we're doing, all this sort of stuff, right? But I've also heard you use the word, and you only used it once, and you didn't use it, in a necessarily disparaging way, but it was management, or to be managed. Right. And actually, this has actually come up the last 3 or 4 conversations we've had with my LinkedIn Live, is that the difference between coaching and managing. Do you see, is there a difference that you see in your mind with those two words and phrases? And, I'm interested in your perspective on that and how that kind of may compare to some of the other people we've had on.
Yeah, gosh. I mean, I don't love labels. And so when I tell a leader, I work more on like, what's your authentic? Like, how do we get you in a zone where you're leading to your strengths? So if you have a super empathetic leader, let's align so that we're getting you in a zone that you can display your empathy, I should say. But because you're also a leader who has to get stuff done in the workplace, we're going to display that empathy in a very strategic way, right? So we're understanding how to leverage their strengths to show up how they need to be in the workforce. And I think the same thing goes for leaders leading their team, right? So whether you say I'm coaching you or I'm managing you, I think the important conversation is, how do you view those words as a leader? What is the difference between those for you? How do you define coach? How do you define managing? And then also asking that of your people. So forgetting, coach and manager for a second, just asking your team, how do they want to be led? What works for you? How do you want me to give you feedback? What time of day is best for you to have these one-on-ones? Because if my leader ever had a one-on-one with me at 3:00 in the afternoon, you better believe that I hated the entire world and that my job sucked, because I'm just not good in the afternoons. And so I had to know that self-awareness is key for your employees. But if they don't have that awareness yet, then you have to start asking those questions for them to think about. And so without getting into the labels, I'd rather have you focus on how you can lead, manage, coach, whatever word you want to put it, in your area of strengths and align to the area of strengths for your leaders or for your employees.
And you mentioned the tool, the strength finder that you use.
Yeah.
tell me what that does for you when you go in and sit down, and maybe that's a quote unquote homework assignment that you give the teams that you work with. What's why do you like that tool so much, and how do you use that tool to develop a high performing team?
Yeah, so I am a big fan of creating a common language within an organization. And if it
Yeah.
can't exist within an organization, you can at least do it on a team. And so using an assessment, whether it's DISC or Myers-Briggs, I've had a lot of exposure to Insights, which is another amazing assessment. And all of them have their awesome factors and maybe their drawbacks. There's no one tool that's going to be the answer. I just think
Mm-hmm.
you need to pick one and decide that that's going to be your common language, and we're going to put that to work. We're going to
Yeah.
use this hammer, this screwdriver every day. It's going to be our common language. And so when I went out on my own and I had exposure to all of these and had certifications in some of them, I thought, I don't want to have too many offerings. Like, oh, I'm working with this client, I'll use DISC, and with this client, I'll use StrengthsFinder, not because it would be hard for me to manage, but because I really wanted to make sure I was making my work as simple as I could for the client.
Mm.
And so with that, I chose Clifton Strengths, which was formerly known as StrengthsFinder through Gallup, amazing organization, research-based. And the reason I chose StrengthsFinder is because it's simple and
Mm-hmm.
it's positive strengths-based.
Mm.
So I chose it because it focuses on those strengths, because I believe fundamentally what Gallup preaches, which is if we're focusing on our weaknesses down here and trying to make them strengths or even trying to move them up, we're wasting our energy. Stop trying to move empathy from the bottom of your list and act like you are an empathy-led leader when you're not. Doesn't mean you're not empathetic. It means you show empathy different than the way Gallup defines it. And I picked that one, George, because a lot of my leaders, and I have low empathy on the 34, but my employees wouldn't know it because I use my top strengths to show them that I care, which is what empathy does. So we just have to learn how to use that strength. And I have a lot of leaders who see empathy low on their list and they're like, great, I'm screwed. As soon as my team sees this, they're going to know that this is why I can't do these things and these things. It's like, no, it's just because don't play like you're, Mary Poppins of leadership when you're this person. Lead like you lead and show empathy the way you show empathy, and that will feel more authentic. And therefore, when it feels authentic and real for your people, you'll build a deeper connection.
Yeah. Man, you're using a lot of phrases. This is, again, one of these talks where I'll go back through with my notebook open and write down the phrases that you're using. I mean, we only have probably, maybe 5 to 10 more minutes. And I also saw in your LinkedIn profile that you've done some TED Talks, which, it doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, you are super articulate and passionate and knowledgeable about, what you're into. And so what was your TED? When did you give your TED Talk? What was the theme and title of it?
Yeah, so I did a TEDx talk. So not TED, TEDx still valid.
TEDx.
Did the TEDx talk. It was
What is the difference? What is the difference between those two? Do you know?
So TED is that main stage, and they're inviting really amazing people. So like Brene Brown did a TED talk, right? Like, so you can watch those TED talks. The difference is TEDx is locally run, right? So you're having, mine was through Marquette University, so a very prestigious university here in Milwaukee. And they put open the call. I didn't see it, but it is locally run, and that team gets to pick the theme of their TEDx event, their annual event, and then they get to pick the speakers that they feel best aligned. So they have control over that. So Marquette University had a team of both students and professor advisors who chose the theme. Mine was rooted. And then they took the applications, reviewed them, and they're trying to pick. And the reason I'm explaining this, George, is that a lot of people will come to me and say, like, I want a TEDx talk. So let me give you this information now, which is then the committee reviews. And so if you've been declined for a TEDx talk, it doesn't mean your idea wasn't valid. It might have been that the let's call it the deck that they put forward, the starting lineup of their TEDx had to be diverse enough, but still aligned to their topic. And maybe they already had another speaker that was very similar to you and maybe inched ahead of you just a little bit, right? And so it doesn't mean that your concept isn't correct. Maybe your concept needs some work, and I would invite you to ask them for very specific feedback. But once you get in, then the process starts, and it's a very intense process. And as much as I enjoyed it, I will actually do it again. I
Mm.
would consider doing it again, probably sharing more of my personal story around domestic violence and other things that have impacted my life. But for me, it was a challenge because even though I'm a keynote speaker and I give workshops and I do these things, I don't normally memorize. I mean, you and I don't have any questions. I like to go off the cuff. I like to follow the energy of the room. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
know where I'm trying to go. But this was very much, this is your time frame. You need to have your
Right.
talk approved. And although they say you don't have to memorize it, at least my team was also like, ooh, a longer pause between those things. And ooh, we don't really like the way you said that. So I did
Really
feel
interesting.
pressure, honestly, George, to memorize
Wow.
it. And so for me, because I'm so fly by the seat of my pants, I thought, girl, you got a TEDx and you better take this seriously. So what are you going to do? And so I was like, okay, I'm a very like habit person. So like, what habit am I going to form around this TEDx talk to make sure I don't show up and waste everybody's time and blow this opportunity? And so I said I was going to practice it 100 times.
Mm.
And my talk was on intrapreneurship, another topic like super near and dear to my heart, which is a lot of people have these amazing strengths in whatever you would consider some of the characteristics that might align to entrepreneurship, whether that's innovation or creativity or leadership, whatever. And being an entrepreneur is not the only route they have to go. They can stay internal to a company. I was a powerful entrepreneur for 20 years on my corporate path, blazing the path, asking curious questions, not keeping my head down and waiting for good things to come to me, but saying yes, volunteering, getting involved, right? So you can own your career and leverage
Mm.
where you're at right now by maximizing your impact as an entrepreneur. And then you're going to get ready for whatever your best next is. And that might be
Mm.
a different role within the organization. It might be another role in another organization. It might be entrepreneurship or freepreneur or solopreneurship someday, but you don't have to know that right now. What I say in the TEDx talk and what I tell everybody now is every day, even right now during a time of quarantine, you own your career. You own the
Yeah.
impact you're making, right? You do. Whatever
Mm-hmm.
constraints you can put on me, you tell me that this is my zone or this is my lane. Yep, I got it. I'm gonna get all those things done. And I'm going to play in this extra space that is really curious and interesting to me and make sure that I make an impact over there because I'm going to learn and I'm going to grow and I'm going to add unique value into the organization above and beyond what they've asked me to do.
Yeah.
Giving yourself that permission to sort of push out the boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
make your impact now, and it will get you ready for your best next. Faster, better, stronger than if you just stayed in your lane and did the job
Yeah. Right.
to do.
Your best next. Your best next. That's the phrase you've used. And we can find that, and I'll put a link to that. We can put that. It's on. I'm guessing we can find that on YouTube, right? Your TEDx talk.
Yep. Yep.
Perfect. I will find that. I'm gonna. We have to wrap up here, and as I have a guy running his car down my driveway here. Gotta love LinkedIn Live, right?
Yeah.
I want to. This is what I'm taking away. There's a lot to take away from this, so I hope people really end up listening and going through this a number of times. But I just want to acknowledge you for something because I really like the. And we don't know each other. We've known each other for 48 minutes and 15 seconds, and I really want to acknowledge you about this because I really like. I like what you're saying, and I guess it's a trait, but
Yeah.
we've spent 48 minutes now talking about identifying strengths and enhancing those strengths and recognizing those strengths and all that. And my takeaway is like, your strengths. Like,
Yeah.
I think you know your strengths. And what I really like though about you knowing your strengths is that you articulate your strengths and you're passionate about your strengths and you don't apologize for your strengths and you don't apologize for speaking your strengths, right? Where I would struggle with, like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm really good at this. And I'm like, right when we started, this is not like, I really appreciate this. Right when we started, you said, I am a leadership expert. I was like, bam, I go, that's awesome. Right. Because that's what you feel. And that's what you know about yourself. That's a strength you have.
Yeah.
And you're super passionate about it. Right. But you kind of went through, as we talked about strengths, like, you know who you are, and you use the word self-aware, but you know who you are, you know what your strengths are, and you're not shy or embarrassed or anything along of articulating your strengths and making them known. Right. I
Yeah.
think that's awesome. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and that goes back to George, though. That's why I love, I think a lot of executives will bat their eyes like, our executive committee doesn't need to use Strengths Finder. And you're like, okay, well, it's a really effective tool, and I've used it effectively with executive committees. And once I can start to articulate with them, it's not just for like the everyday employees or even middle management, it can be for everybody, because that common language starts to empower us, right? Now I
Right.
can use a phrase that when I say I'm a futuristic and a strategic leader, or I have high relator, which is the ability to connect deeply with people. We have a common language, so it doesn't seem braggy. It just says I'm owning who I am. These are my natural strengths or talents that have been
Yeah, good for
honed
you.
over the years to now become strengths, and I get to use them every day.
Yeah, good for you. I think
Yeah.
that's great. Yeah,
And
I mean, I think,
we can all have that same
yeah,
empowerment. And don't get me wrong, I still have imposter syndrome, right? When I'm sitting across a CEO and I say I'm an extremely strategic thinker, I'm like, oh, am I going to say are they going to
right.
be like, are you
I
as
like
strategic
it.
as me? Maybe, but I have to own that and say, this is how I use my strategic thinking. Might be different than you.
Right.
This is how I am a very strategic thinker, and I can articulate that through this common language. It is very empowering. So I encourage everybody, whatever assessment you want to take, increase your self-awareness. It's been proven
Yeah.
to be the #1 predictor of success for CEOs. If they can
Really.
predict, not strategic thinking, not charisma, none of that stuff. Self-awareness predicts the success of CEOs. I think that was Inc.
Mm,
magazine that did that study. If it can work for CEOs, it can work for us too. So build
yeah.
that self-awareness, give yourself permission, figure out a common language that you can use and reference, right? That's like, I have sort of a research to fall back on that says, this is why I can say that, right? This
Right.
organization does it. So it's not just you coming up with like, I'm a bad mamma jamma. Like, I could say that, but people might really not know what that means.
Right.
So give that common language, it'll empower you, and it'll push down that imposter syndrome just a
Yeah.
little.
No, I really appreciate that theme and message. And I'll put your link, once this is on LinkedIn Live, but it allows me to edit all the show notes, and this will be in my podcast here shortly as well. And I'll make sure that your link, that your TEDx talk is in there. How can, other than LinkedIn, which I'll put your name also in the profile so people can track you down on LinkedIn. Do you have a company website? How could people track you down online other than LinkedIn?
Yeah, we do. So a couple quick notes related to the TEDx talk, George. We have a free listener's guide that'll help you take the talk and sort of ingrain that. How do
Okay.
I own my career and create my best next? We also have a leader's guide that can go along with that. So your team could listen to the talk, and then you can have a team meeting discussion. Then you can use that in your one-on-one. So leaders are always looking for like, what am I going to talk about in these? Well, let's make common language by talking about it on the team, and then I can use it one-on-one to promote that within each individual on my team. So I wanted to make sure I give enough resources to people there.
Okay.
You can find all that on our website. It's buildhighperformingteams.com. So I know it's kind of long, but buildhighperformingteams.com. And then also, George, I'll let you link to this in the show notes, but we have a free webinar on demand right now about thriving teams. So leading thriving teams. We also have 2 workshops we're doing virtually for clients, and then one-on-one coaching. But the webinar is free. It's out there. Those tools are free. And we also have a couple other free guides: anxiety at work, high-performing teams during times of change. Like,
Right.
pertinent things that leaders and employees, because it's not just up to the leader, but anybody can grab and start putting them to work today to make a difference in their own career and that of their teams.
Man, that's perfect. And we'll get all that in the show notes and also on the podcast notes. And I can't thank you enough. This was, again, like the past 4 or so LinkedIn Lives I've done. It is me clicking connect on LinkedIn, sending off a note, and getting, a response and striking up a conversation. So, and that's exactly how this happened. And because of that, I've used this phrase many times in my podcast and my LinkedIn Live. The only things that change you in life are the people you meet and the books you read. And so I'm willing to put myself out there to meet as many people and have some great conversations. So, selfishly, I get better, and I can then, impact my teams, impact my 2 children, and impact my family and all that sort of stuff. But it's the people you meet. And I say that because what a great hour with you, and you have impacted, everybody listening, but definitely me with your message and passion for it all. So thank you so much for your time, Anna.
Yeah, of course. Reach out anytime, George, or anybody who's listening. I'm happy to be an ear or give my 2 cents. happy to support you guys. Until then, I'm just giving everybody peace and progress. I know it's a surreal time of change, but we're going to come out on the other side, and the new world
No question.
will be better and brighter. I know it.
No question. Peace and progress. I'm going to steal that too. All right, Anna, have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.